Hello, ladies and gentlemen, viewers all. Welcome to LYNX Now, Episode 1. This is the show where I recap and preview and talk about the LYNX Football League, which is the fantasy football league that I do with a couple of friends of mine. And we recap, the previous week. We go through power rankings. We discuss we talk about questions. We discuss things. We have a couple segments, and then we preview, the whole week afterwards and the predictions, etc. So I hope you enjoy. This is a new series that kind of splits time with UFL Rewind. So I'm really hoping you enjoy, and I'm really hoping you like it, because this is a way to get news out about. Sorry. It's a way to get news out about the whole league and give you some insight to what you may not be able to see with some YouTube or with some Unitards workers and some friends of mine. So we're gonna start LYNX now, the new series with week 1 recaps. By the way, LYNX Now and UFL Rewind is kind of like a Colin Coward-esque type show, but without it being a radio show and without it focusing on a multitude of different things. So LYNX Now, we're gonna start out the first ever episode with a week 1 recap. We're gonna start over in the land of the Hardiacs with Will Guglielmo and the Smack Talker Skywalkers against the Hardiacs and myself, Zachary Serra. I will refer to myself as Zachary Serra instead of just me or I or whatever. So when I say Zachary Serra, I talk about myself, all right? So the Smack Talker Skywalkers traveled into the Hardiac wasteland, with Zachary Serra ending up coming out on top 108-78 against William Guglielmo. The biggest the absolute biggest margin of victory the entire week and so far in the entire league. Blair Walsh, the kicker for the Minnesota Vikings, 14 points was Guglielmo's top scorer, and Antonio Brown with 24 points was the Hardiacs' top scorer. I don't really have much to talk about in this game other than the fact that while it may be the biggest margin victory in the league so far, it doesn't quite say that Guglielmo is a bad guy, or Guglielmo has a bad team, or Serra has a good team. It just necessarily means that one week they were on top, and the other week, or in 1 week, the other guy was just not having it. And I think Guglielmo played with an injured, with a guy who was injured, was probable going to the game, but he got a limited amount of snaps, so he didn't get too many points from him. But nevertheless, Serra walks out on top 108-78, putting Guglielmo at 0-1 and Serra at 1-0. Next game, obviously the game of the week, Tristan Charlo falling to Jessica Solnick 114-100. Charlo having 35 points from Andrew Luck, his top scorer, the Indianapolis Colts quarterback, and Drew Brees, 30 points from the New Orleans Saints quarterback, is the top scorer for Solnick and Team Hollywood. This match was, the best game that came close. Charlo put everything he had out on the table. His kicker did miss a kick or two, which kind of cost him the game this week. But nevertheless, Tristan Charlo is one of the top guys in this league by the looks of what he did in week 1. And Jessica Solnick, my oh my, putting up the most points in the league so far, having the best outing from every single one of her players that week. Just knows how to draft, and this is her first year when it comes to fantasy football. So for her to win in her fantasy football debut against Tristan Charlo, a guy who pretty much knows what he's doing, against her, who she doesn't necessarily know everything about football. She is a Steelers fan, but she doesn't know everything about football. Yet drafted an incredible draft when it came down to a couple of weeks ago, and proved that she could be and probably is one of, if not the best player in the entire league. And that's got to be saying something for somebody who's debuting in fantasy football, especially in a stacked league such as this one, and something that in a league that has as much coverage as this. Tristan Charlo put out a great game, put out a great outing, ended up coming away with the L, but Solnick, while she did have one of the better games of anybody in the league this week, or last week, she does have some flaws. Her kicker isn't that great. I mean, she did pick the downer kicker of the two, picking Graham Gano over Justin Tucker, who scored 2 or 3 points less. Wouldn't have made a big difference, but the problem that I could see happening with Jessica Solnick over the next couple of weeks is possibly putting in the wrong players or starting the wrong players over guys that can get more points than her starters. And I think that could end up coming to bite her. Now, with that being said, I think she is probably the best player in the league as week one would show. But take nothing away from Tristan Charlo, possibly one of the top 3 guys in the league, and obviously a shoo-in for the playoffs with performances for the next couple of weeks as he had this past week. And the next game we have to talk about, the final game of the week, was Jordan Lehman beating Brendan Buzak 86-80, putting Buzak at an 0-1 count and Lehman at a 1-0 count. Now, this is another thing where week one may not show the talent of a team throughout the rest of the number of weeks. Lehman, while he did pick up a win over Brendan Buzak, did not pick it up easily. He was trailing by about 3 points throughout the entire week until the Monday night game, where he was just barely able to pick up the win. So Jordan Lehman does have some flaws, especially when it comes to picking starters over people on his bench, because his bench ended up scoring a lot more points than his starters last week. And Brendan Buzak really didn't give a shit about the league at the start. Maybe that'll change, but he will have to make a couple of moves over the next couple of weeks in order to improve and possibly get to the postseason. Although starting with an 0-1 record is not the way you want to start the season, but a close game nonetheless. The closest game of the week, Lehman beating Buzak by 6 points. I'm looking forward to what Jordan Lehman does throughout the rest of the league or throughout the rest of the season. And Brendan Buzak, I want to see how he can improve his team, kind of mangle them a little bit more into a team that can make the postseason and can make a run towards the Fantasy Cup. So, with that being said, we'll go to our first segment, Power Rankings, which is where we signify the top 7 signify all 7 owners in the league and rank them down from 1 to 7. In the number 1 spot, we have 1-0 Jessica Solnick, Team Hollywood. While she may have some problems picking starters over her bench over the next couple of weeks, there is no doubting she is one of the more powerful teams in the entire league. She has a great quarterback who may not be a consistent 30-point scorer, but is a consistent fantasy point scorer nonetheless. Has great kickers, has a great defense when it comes down to, I believe, the Carolina Panthers. Has some great wide receivers, has a stellar halfback with Le'Veon Bell that will come into play in week 5. She is stacked beyond the brim. She had a great draft, and we want to see how she will continue to go on through the next couple of weeks. I think she will be successful this season, maybe walking away with a loss or 2, if any. I'm going to put Jessica Solnick at the top spot in the power rankings. Second spot goes to the 1-0 Hardy Axe with myself, Zachary Sarah. I feel like I had a great draft a number of weeks ago, and putting up the absolute mauling that I had against Will Guglielmo this past week, I think it proved. I mean, while Jessica Solnick had a closer game and had the most points scored, I did have the farthest outcome, whether it was against a good team or blech team. I still put out a good, Zachary Sarah still put out a good inning, and walking away with a 1-0 victory with a 30-point deficit margin, that gives you a number 2 spot. Number 3 goes to the 0-1 Tristan Charlo, Team Charlo, or Team Harambe Hungry Gorillas, as his team is called. I give him the 3rd spot over Jordan Lehman because while he may have walked away with the L, he did walk away with a stellar team, a stellar group. He has a great quarterback with Andrew Luck who can consistently put up 25 points or higher every single week. He should have a dominant season this year, and that should only lead Tristan Charlo to good things. I think he can be a shoo-in for the postseason, and if so, if he can get past a team like Jessica Solnick or a team like Zachary Sarah, he could be a shoo-in for the Fantasy Cup. Or what is it called? What did I call it? I called it something. Fantasy Cup, yes. Fantasy Cup at the end of the season. The number 4 spot, of course, has to go to the 1-0 Team Lehman, Jordan Lehman. Excuse me. Having a close game against Brendan Buzak, who isn't really stacked but is a decent team, can kind of downplay a little bit, can get you annoyed, can get you a little bit anxious to prove yourself over the next couple of weeks. I think Jordan Lemon can do a great couple things. I think he can honestly pick up a wild card spot if he really put his mind and effort into it. And I'm going to give him the 4th spot in this power rankings for this week. Number 5 spot goes to the 0-1 Team Buzak, Brendan Buzak. I believe that with a couple trades, a couple moves, maybe a couple pickups in waiver claims, he can be a top 4 team. But right now, he's on the outside looking in. It's a possibility that he can make the postseason. He's going to have to make some moves. His team is a little bit downplayed at the moment, but he can always make that burst and stride to the postseason with the amount of effort that he can put into it. So, Brendan Buzak gets the number 5 spot. Number 6 spot goes to the 0-1 Smack Talker Skywalkers, Will Guglielmo. I think he also is another team that has to make some moves. With your kicker being the top scorer on your team for the entire week, doesn't really show something great, especially in week 1. But I think if he were to make some moves, he could definitely be one of the top teams in the wild card hunt. He is currently in the hunt, but one of the top teams in the entire league if he were to put the effort into. Of course, an 0-1 start, as I said earlier, was not the best start or not the way you would want to start the season, but he can always battle back from it. And I think week 2 could be a must-win for him. And of course, number 7, the man we have yet to talk about because he did have a bye week in week 1, the 0-0 Team Schaffner, Zachary Schaffner, who has a really strong core when it comes to his team and can do a lot of great things down the line. I, of course, have to put him in the 7th spot because it's week 1, and we didn't see him. We haven't seen him perform. We've seen everybody else perform, but we haven't seen him. Next week, we should have a clear understanding of everybody, of every owner, of every team in the entire league by next week's links now. So after power rankings, we get that through. We need to go through some takeaways. And the first takeaway I have is Jessica Solnick and Zachary Sura are the top 2 in the league after week 1. Jessica Solnick putting up the most points in week 1, having a stellar core, a stellar team. When it comes down to this fantasy league, only derives her almost a shoo-in for Fantasy Cup number 1. Zachary Sura, on the other hand, putting out a miraculous big margin victory over William Guglielmo. You can't take anything away from that. He has a great team. He had a great draft, as Solnick did, and I think both of them can be shoo-ins for the Fantasy Cup 1. And I think if they did not make it, then whoever ended up beating them in the postseason, because let's be honest, they could probably both make it to the postseason, would be the upset team going into the Fantasy Cup. Second takeaway I have is Brendan Buzak needs to make some trades and needs to make some moves. His team is pretty much Dallas Cowboys oriented, and he really needs to kind of find his way, kind of inch his way through the league and try to make a playoff run. I think he can if he puts some effort into it, but he does need to make some moves over the next couple of weeks in order to prove himself a top team in the league and a playoff contender. And the third takeaway I have is Zachary Schaffner has to make an impact in week 2. We've seen all other owners and all other teams go up against, consistent, what could be consistent teams in week 1, and Zachary Schaffner is the only owner, has the only team that did not play yet, and really he needs to make an impact and needs to show prove his worth in week 2 in order to be taken as a serious playoff contender. Next segment we have is one word, in which we describe all owners with one word from their standpoint from this entire season. So we go up number 1 with Jessica Solnick, and I'm going to give her one word: dominant. She proved to be a team with a lot of consistent players, has a stellar bench with Le'Veon Bell currently on, who probably will make a burst for the playoffs, who probably will make an impact when he's off of suspension. And I think Jessica Solnick's team is absolutely dominant, and that's why I gave her the word dominant. Zachary Sura, I'm going to give consistent. I think all of his players on his team are a consistent or are scoring fantasy points on a consistent basis. I think he has an entirely incredible team, and I think he can really showcase his abilities over the next couple of weeks and make a run for the postseason. Brendan Buzak, I'm going to give him one word: weak. His team is weak. I honestly assume if he were to make some moves, some clever pickups off of the trade waiver or off of the free agency uh, little pool in the league, I think he can make a run to the playoffs. But at the moment that he's on right now, with what he's going with, or with what he's working with now, his team is weak and his playoff chances are weak. So I give him the word weak. One word for Jordan Lehman is capable. I think with the team he has, he can build a strong run into the playoffs. But from what we saw in week one, he can have his problems. And starting the correct players could be something that could be his downfall in the number of weeks. But I think he is very capable of not only making the postseason, but having a stellar season and possibly making the Fantasy Cup. One word for Tristan Charlo is sturdy. While he may not be the most dominant team in the league, while he may not have the most dominant team in the league, he is absolutely sturdy enough to make the playoffs. I think he is a top 3 team in this league. Of course, we haven't seen Zach Schaffner yet, but I think he is a top 3 team in this league, and I think he will make the postseason. He is a strong competitor, and as long as his players stay healthy, I think he is a sturdy team, or a sturdy owner with a sturdy team. One word for Zachary Schaffner is unproven. Now, I say that because, of course, he hasn't played in week 1. Week 2 is almost a must-win to prove his worth, and that's all I really have to say on that. And one word for William Guglielmo is preoccupied. When it came down to having the least points scored in the entire league in week 1 and having your kicker be the most points scored on your team, it doesn't really show you to be a strong contender in the league. However, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he is in another fantasy football league, which could cause him to be preoccupied with this one. Now, do I think he's capable of making it to the postseason if he were to make some moves? Yes. Now, do I think he can make a postseason run? That's really dependent on how much he puts into this league. Of course, his other league, what I believe they all put money into a pot instead of the jackpot that we have here. I think William Guglielmo needs to focus on the LYNX Football League in order to really be a competitor this season. Questions. Number 1 we have, is Jessica Solnick a shoo-in for Fantasy Cup 1? I would say so based off of week 1. But if we're going through the next couple of weeks, which we have yet to get through, I'm going to say no. Because there are a number of teams. Zachary Serra with a very strong team. Tristan Charlo with a very sturdy team. Zachary Schaffner with a great core. There have been a number of upsets that have happened in many different fantasy football leagues all around the world. And I think Jessica Solnick could be at the hands of an upset at any point in time. Any team is capable of being upset, and any team is really capable of upsetting another team. Of course, we haven't seen whether or not Jessica Solnick's team is going to get injured, is going to be plagued by injuries. We don't know that yet. But for right now, I'm going to say no until we get further down into maybe midseason. Question number 2. Can Brendan Buzak make an impact in the coming weeks? I'm going to say maybe. It depends on whether he can make moves, what he can do with his team. If he were to make an impact, I think he could be a playoff contender. But right now, I'm going to say maybe. We haven't seen too much from him, but we haven't seen too little from him either. So I'm going to go with maybe. Question number 3. Is week 2 a must-win for Zachary Schaffner? I'm going to say to prove himself, yes. All other teams have proven themselves to be what they are in the league, and Zachary Schaffner really needs to prove himself to be one of the top teams in the league if he wants to make an impact this season. So to prove himself, I'm going to say yes. Question number 4. Is William Guglielmo the Cleveland Browns of the NFL? Cleveland Browns of the LYNX Football League? I'm going to say not yet. We haven't seen too much from him. We haven't seen too little from him, as the case is with all other teams in the LYNX Football League. But one thing is for sure, Guglielmo has yet to become the Cleveland Browns. I mean, you have Brendan Buzak, who, depending on whether he makes moves or not, could be the Cleveland Browns. Zachary Schaffner, depending on how he does in the next couple of weeks, could be the Cleveland Browns. Hell, any team could be the Cleveland Browns when it comes to injuries. So I'm going to say not yet, but over the course of the next couple of weeks, if he can't win, if he just flounders, possibly. Question number 5. Is Tristan Charlo a top 3 rank owner? Yes. I think Tristan Charlo is one of the more dominant teams in the LYNX Football League. And I think with the correct moves and with the correct starting lineup, he can be a shoo-in for the Fantasy Cup. So we move on to importance of Week 2. All teams, including the ones that are on the bye week for this upcoming week, will be in this skit or whatever. I don't know. Every team gets one. So Zachary Sierra, of course, get a win in Week 2. He will be going on to face Jessica Solnick, another dominant competitor in Week 3. Obviously, that's going to be the game of the week for next week. But in order to get momentum towards next week, I'm going to go and say that in order for Zachary Sierra to have momentum going into next week and possibly pick up a win, he needs to get a win in Week 2. Jordan Lehman needs to outplay Zachary Sierra. I think every chance he gets, he's going to try to outplay Zachary Sierra, the owner, the one at the top of the food chain right now. And right now, this week, he needs to outplay Zachary Sierra in order to prove himself as a top team. Jessica Solnick needs to make an example out of Brendan Buzak in order to prove herself as the top team, the top owner in the league. She needs to prove a point against Brendan Buzak. She needs to beat him down to a pulp by a big victory margin in order to prove that she is the top team in the league. And then we could probably take her seriously as a dominant threat in the league. Brendan Buzak needs to get a big win at home. I doubt it's going to happen, but with Jessica Solnick being on the road into Brendan Buzak's home, wherever that is, he needs to get a big win in order to prove himself as a top team. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to fall to 0-2. But with correct moves, who knows? William Guglielmo needs to prove that last week was a fluke. 30-point deficit loss is a big one to come back from. Tough pill to swallow, but I think Guglielmo can do it. Against a team like Schaffner, who knows? We haven't seen him yet. But he needs to prove that last week is a fluke to make himself a dominant team, or to prove himself worthy of being in the league. Zachary Schaffner needs to make a name for himself. Not much else to say about that. And Jordan Lehman needs to improve, as it is his bye week. Maybe needs to make some moves. Who knows? Week 2 preview. The Hardiacks at Team Lehman. Biggest strong point, Zachary Sierra needs to assert his dominance. Jordan Lehman must play smart in order to pick up a win over the dominant Hardiacks. And this will be the game of the week. I'm predicting the Hardiacks to come out on top by a close margin. Team Hollywood at Team Buzak. Jessica Solnick must play like she did last week in order to make herself a top team in the league. And Buzak must fight back in order to get a win here. But I'm going with Team Hollywood and Jessica Solnick to pick up the win. And finally, Smack Talker Skywalker at Team Schaffner. Guglielmo must play smart in order to pick up a win against Zach Schaffner. And of course, Schaffner needs to prove his worth and needs to needs to put in the right starters. I'm going to predict Schaffner to win this game. I've seen his lineup, and I think it's capable of beating Guglielmo this week. So with that being said, that's all we have for LYNX Now, Episode 1, Season 1. Thank you guys for watching. We will probably be back next Friday or Saturday or something like that in order to go for Episode 2 of LYNX Now. Thank you guys for watching. I sincerely hope you enjoyed. Remember, like, comment, and subscribe for more. I am Zach Hardy, and I am signing off.